We are talking about people transitioning from, I don't know, PP to lower primary, to upper primary, lower secondary, I don't know. Have we engaged on where those that will be interested in going to our universities, how are we going to transition? Do we have a clear plan? And this plan cannot start 1 year before people transition to university. Because right now we are talking about people transitioning to junior secondary next year, and we are saying we are going to be building classrooms in January. We are going to be training teachers next year. Now, it is bad for secondary school, as my brother has said, but it is worse for university, for you to start planning this year for a university intake next year for people who have come through a system that is slightly different or even significantly different from the systems that we have been taking children to university through. So this is why I keep saying we have to engage in the deeper thinking rather than these surface jousts about 844, the devil, CBC, the angel. We are talking about the lives of these children. We are talking about Kenya 20 years from now. Every mistake we make now, we are going to pay for it in 15, 20 years. When these children that we're experimenting with, that we're making mistakes with, will be adults in charge, looking at us and wondering what they're going to do in the world where we are meant to be competing with others who are doing things differently. I think there's a deeper conversation to be had. I get frustrated when we reduce it to a simple joust between pro-CBC, anti-CBC, what is competence, what is not competence. Those are things that are settled in education.
Prof,
yeah.
in 1 minute, if you got audience with education CS, Professor George Magoha, what would you tell him?
I will tell him, first, we have to identify the problem correctly before we start managing it. He's a surgeon. He will understand that when I tell him that. You cannot go into an abdomen to remove an appendix that is not inflamed. We are throwing, all sorts of solutions before we really define the problem. I have had the problem with 844 is it was rote learning. Fair enough. It was memorizing. It was over-examination, and so on. Is the solution to overhaul and throw away the system and then come and say, now we are doing CBC and it is different, and you're implementing it with the same monkeys in the same forest? Throwing them at that problem and telling them, you have been over-examining our children. You have been teaching them rote learning too much for 20, 30 years. Mm-hmm. I want you to now change and start doing CBC. But I will train you slowly. In the meantime, 6 years have gone by. The children are going through this system. You are not prepared. The materials are not ready. The classrooms are not ready. So first we must make the right diagnosis. If the problem was that we are over-examining the children, we should have sat down and discussed, why are we over-examining the children? If the problem was that we're encouraging too much rote learning, we should have discussed, how do we fix rote learning?
Well, I'm sure it was discussed.
I know it was. And this is why I'm provoking my brother here, because then he will engage perhaps in the thought process. But he has a very beautiful cop-out, and I will tell you what it is. That they are intellectuals. They were engaged in a thought process. They came up with a product, which is the report, which made beautiful recommendations. He cannot tell you about the implementation of those solutions because it doesn't sit in the locus of the people that do that implementation. It doesn't sit in the place where people release funding to implement those things. He doesn't. When we start talking about funding, implementation, he becomes a simple Kenyan like myself. Therefore, it's unfair to throw this question at him and tell him, are you going to fund this primary school kid? Are you going to fund this? Are you going to make sure people get to university? He will tell you as an intellectual, I finished my job. I handed over the task to the problem holder. Ask the problem holder.